What's going on, y'all? There's been a lot of noise going on all over the internet, and making sure that you can stay up to date with everything that's going on won't require too much of your time because, as you already know, I'm probably out here doing the research and studying for you. But I do want you to understand a few things, all right? A few years ago, a transition began as our phones started developing better and better technologies. The infrastructure of the banking systems never changed. All right, they were still running on dinosaur technology, which means that at a certain point, the technology was going to be so advanced that we would have to absolutely replace the old systems. And so we've reached that point now. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this transition in that how money became now digitalized as a digital asset, and how this new digital asset, as opposed to gold, can help the entire global economic situation improve by giving us something tangible, a reserve asset that is tangible, limited, scarce, as well as backed by gold by independent countries. All right, now this may all seem crazy that this is currently happening right now during our personal lifetime, but I want you to remember that this was all meant to happen sooner or later. We're just happy to be happy. We're just happy that it's happening right now, where you at home could listen for the information that could possibly change your life by breaking the cycles of economic slavery and putting you in a position to become an investor and not a slave. But that's actually what this is all about. I want to describe the old ways of using money for payments as well as for controls. And so this whole conversation may seem a little wild, but I want you to stay with me for a while because I'm not going to make it that long, but it is going to connect certain dots that you might have forgotten about. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, because if we recognize what is true, is that if you were trying to trade an apple for some beans, that wouldn't work because these items have opposing values. A certain quantity of beans will get you a specific amount of one apples. Now, every trader that you see might have different prices, and this is why bartering or trading began. All right, so first it was called agriculture, and then became trading, which this became commerce, which leads to the market. Now, if you can understand where I'm at so far, all of these things were dependent upon something. Agriculture was dependent upon the sun and the moon and the seasons. All right, trading became about the tribes and their goods. Commerce began when money began. All right, so commerce really is the idea of money, routes, ports, and shipping. We started going bigger and bigger. And then markets was actually in New York, and I believe Japan, and I believe in Britain. These became the places where you can understand where everybody that was in commerce was doing business, and that's how we have the Dow Jones and the S&P 500. Dow Jones and S&P 500. These are like where we keep track of indexes so that we can understand what is going on globally. All right, but as agriculture, which was about growing things out of the food, this was scarce. This is all about scarcity. And then trading became about commodities. Commerce became about portability of wealth. And then market became about the impact or the value of this profit or debt. And this is actually where everything changed. when we started using debt as a new form of currency, all right, for commodities and exchanges, because as each country got deeper and deeper in debt, other countries would buy their debt, get them out of debt, and let them move forward. This actually happened in Japan back in the day. I believe it was about 40 to 60 years ago. I can't tell you the exact date right now, but in Japan, zombie companies began to appear. And these zombie companies were companies that were in so much debt that no matter how much they sold off or how much they worked at it, they would never be able to repay themselves out of debt, which essentially, even though they were still alive because they were operating, they were already dead because of the amount of debt. And so really all of this leads to the idea that because as our ability to trade goods kept expanding, countries came up with their independent, what's called fiat currencies. And these fiat currencies were meant so that if we traded in that, we would be able to then go ahead and trade in different ways as well. So we could trade our beans into fiat and our fiat for apples, and then whatever apple we bought, right, you could then turn that into the fiat and then bring it back to buy some more beans or so on. And the idea here was that there was a gold standard. A gold standard. Because gold was scarce. It was a metal that had to be dug up. It was one of those things where individuals really had to put in a lot of effort, and therefore gold was limited. Therefore, it is a great scarce resource. Because it is a great scarce resource, it became one of the smartest things to do to create a currency backed up by what's scarce. So that way those countries with a lot of gold would definitely be rich. And, somehow when Nixon came into play, there's a long story, and I don't want to get into it right now because I'm trying to keep it short and sweet and simple for you. But in 1971, Nixon took us off of the gold reserve. All right, moving us forward into what is now called the petrodollar, where we go from gold to oil, or the petrodollar. But then what happened was, as Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, and all these different countries started having a lot of oil to produce, and then the coronavirus happened, there was a surplus of oil. And so there was a war between oil countries, where like Russia and Saudi Arabia, and I believe Norway might be one of those too. They were all trying to figure out who was going to keep producing the most oil, therefore lowering the cost of oil production because they were able to produce more. And at the end, it was between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Then it was decided that they were neither going to trade in dollars because the dollar kept losing its value. So now oil is gone. And then here's the crazy part, all right? For the last few years, the digital yuan has been planning its release. The digital yuan. Now this is supposed to be a gold-backed currency. Going back to the old way, the gold. And the gold, where could it be found if we didn't have any more in our reserves? Well, you got to understand that there's countries in the world like the Philippines and Zimbabwe that have vast amounts of gold just sitting there in their vaults. And this is why we got to keep talking about the new world asset reserve. All right, the new world reserve asset. The new world reserve asset is still based upon the idea of gold, but because most countries do not have gold, we are now going to go ahead and distribute a brand new coin, the digital yuan, that is supposed to be able to go ahead and help commerce be facilitated through the One Belt, One Silk Road system. So the Silk Road. Silk Road. All right, now this means that China is going to go ahead and do business with all of the EU, the Eastern China, Southern China. We're going to talk about all of Asia, all of India. I mean, I'm talking about they are everywhere. they've built the infrastructure for pretty much every country, whether it's ports, airports, or traveling highways. The Silk Road is basically a way for China to be able to do trade with everybody, all right? And it all depends on their ability to create a currency that they're all willing to accept. Now, due to the fact that China has been building infrastructure in different countries that will let them allow to transition to the digital yuan. The yuan is so that way they can create jobs, they can pay their people out, they can have an agreeable value, and this is becoming a little bit crazier and crazier and crazier, but we have to understand how all of this began, because if you can understand the gold standard, the oil standard, and how later on we became debt standard, because it was all about credit. Credit is what fucked up the economy, because before the pandemic, there was a higher speed of transactions, of passing over money. Not just the number of bills were created, but it was A, how fast it was being passed off, and B, how many bills were there in production or in volume being passed around in the United States. Because if we do not understand these two aspects of monetary policy, then we get stuck on the idea that just because we are printing out money, it's devaluing it. No, it's not devaluing the dollar because we're printing out money. It's devaluing the dollar because we keep printing out money and it's not being moved around to make an economic impact to all of us. And so because of this economic impact is stagnant, we got to anticipate that the amount of money being passed around is also going to be stagnant. Therefore, we're going to be seeing that we could buy less with our dollars. And even more so on that note, now that China is trying to get rid of its $1 trillion debt on the US, can you imagine when all that money comes back into the United States, all this money is going to add more bills. And all these bills, I'm talking about bills, not bills as in debts that you have to pay, but all this fake fiat money is going to come back to the US, and it's going to cause us to then have this period of like, okay, well, what do we do? If we go to the banks right now and ask them to give us our money, sadly, very sadly, we won't be able to do so because of what's called the SWIFT payment network. The SWIFT payment network basically takes, you put in ATM, you put your money inside the ATM, and then what happens is bank leverages it to make money with interest. And then if they got their money back, you get a note, an IOU, which we call a paper bill. Now this Federal Reserve note, you will not be able to turn this note in and get gold out. That's just how it works. You gotta understand that. Now, this whole thing about money is a lie. And so now we gotta talk about what is the real new money that's gonna keep us afloat, because if you don't pay attention to this, you're really gonna regret it, all right? The Great Reset is going on right now, right underneath our very eyes. And if you haven't been watching the news, and if you haven't been paying attention to Twitter, I gotta say, Twitter's the best place to keep up with all this rapid information coming out. Then you're really missing out. I got off social media completely, but the moment I found out about what is going on at the deepest levels, I had no choice but to get fully committed to this mission and do my research, not just for myself, but for my legacy. And at the end of the day, if I'm doing the research, it's time for me to share my voice and share my opinion and speak up. Because if you miss out, then we're both gonna be feeling like, yo, they just took advantage of us. But that's not the case, and I want you to know that. They didn't take advantage of you. They simply created a system that you were not educated on. And so that's what we're gonna talk about right now. All right, so if you're with me so far, I wanna continue on with what's called the SWIFT payment network and how it will be replaced and where it originated and what its purpose was. Because if you can see where this is all coming from, it's all about payment control. The more that we can control the source of money, meaning the SWIFT payment network was meant to basically track serial code numbers and basically hold money for people. Hold money for people. Now, by tracking the serial code numbers, you can see if there was a counterfeit bill. By holding money for the people, you can guarantee that the people would have dependency to these bankers. All right? These bankers are the main problem. You may have heard of overdraft fees. You may have heard of hidden fees. Or you may have been hit with a couple fees that you weren't expecting by using your bank. And that's the whole point here. Your money should not be in the hands of a bank, let alone a bank that takes your money, leverages it in order to make more money for themselves. In fact, you should probably learn these skills yourselves. You see, the ability to arbitrage money is not hard. It's just that most people don't ever learn the fundamentals of economics. And, well, let's be honest, it's a big topic. So for right now, let's not dive that direction. We're just going to focus on what really matters to you. All right? Now, in the past, I've talked about the Internet of Information. Information is different than value. Money is value. Information is accessibility. All right? Like right now, how easy is it for me to be able to send this video to YouTube after recording it in my house just through a phone? It's pretty simple. But it took decades and decades of development of the internet to improve our telecommunication systems. That's it. So you got to see it on the big timeline. So, if I'm not mistaken, the first computer was made in the 60s, between the 30s to the 60s. Then, it was taken all away, right? In the sense of, we anticipated that in 2000, there was going to be a great shift. But yeah, there was. Here they were built. Here they were sold, advertised, marketed. And then here, internet was launched to the people. Because remember, the internet was a creation of DARPA, the military's defense branch. And DARPA is a government agency that not only hopes to protect and maintain information private, but it is a deep research facility that is meant to be able to create all these different types of projects, such as MK Ultra and just like the CIA and all that stuff. DARPA is one of the ways that we are able to basically continue to have our technological edge over the rest of the competition. And so if you understand that we built the PCs, and while we were developing what they could do, just like going to space and all that stuff, we started making it more appealing to the people. Microsoft and Apple. And then here it becomes about taking these big computers and making them portable. All right, so portability became important. And then when we got to the 2010s, it became more about social media. So you want to think, okay, it went from just being specifically for mathematical equations, which are meant to help us achieve quantum supremacy. And then it goes into social media, into the hands of these kids, where the technology is so advanced that with a swipe, you can do anything. I mean, think about it. We went from these major computers that would take up rooms into just a swipe and a screen. The rate of technological advances is ridiculous, but it could only be done because of these people back here. Now, prior to that, in the 20s and in the 1800s, we were realizing how to leverage electromagnetism and, more than anything, radiation. We were learning how to see past what the average eye could see. So I want you to understand that we have, as a society, as a civilization, been learning a lot during the last few years. But the truth is, because you were probably born somewhere around, let's say, right here, let's say the 80s and on, most of the people who are watching this are probably watching this from, they were born in the 80s and forward. So because we started watching from here, we have been programmed a certain way. We respect everything that's happened from here forward, and we neglect everything that's happened back. But you see, the real world situation right now was created years ago, many, many years ago. And the truth is, a monetary system like what we described was not created yesterday. It was created decades ago, millennia ago almost. All right? All this many years ago, there had to be a way of exchanging goods. You see, the first few coins were seashells, were salt. All right? Salt was a form of currency. And as we kept developing these bigger and bigger tribes, we had to get used to the idea of doing bigger and bigger trades with more scarce material, with more better recognized materials, with materials that only kings could give out to control their people, right? So each king had their own different coin. At the end of the day, that coin was made out of a metal because only metal workers could really work on that and put the symbol of the king on that coin, and it made it easier to trade. So before metals, different tangible items were used, fungible, tangible items were used, but at the end of the day, metals were the ones that held on the longest, which is why they always tell you involve yourself or invest yourself in golds, metals, and then be able to diversify your assets. But the idea is that if money has been evolving as well, not just technology, because remember, money is a technology. All right, so because money is a technology, I need you to start thinking differently about what it is that you're holding in your pocket or in your bank account. All right, right now it is all digital ones and zeros. And so for us to be able to transition into this new digital economy without any hurdles, we have to understand the foundation of this new creation. All right, and so let's go ahead and move on from everything that you see here, because I do want to get back to the Swift payment method, but I just needed you to understand that we've been trying to remove pedophilia, the black market, the trading of organs and the selling of organs, but in order for us to do that, we have to first be able to understand where the money is at, where it's going, whose hands it's in, and where did it come from. But we can't do that currently because money, as in its current state, is easy to falsify, it's easy to duplicate, and at the end of the day, it's easy to hide because there is no way to track these numbers if they're not being used in a bank. And so there's a lot of nostro vostro accounts. And these nostro vostro accounts are basically accounts held within accounts held within accounts that are just not being exposed to the public. And because of that, there's a lot of money just sitting there wasting time and not really increasing in its value, because I'm sure that you guys already know we have on average a 2% inflation rate, which basically means that in the last 70 to 80 years, we've seen a 95% devaluing of the dollar. All right, that means that if every 2 years we see an average of 2% deflation, or the value of the dollar is decreasing, then what you want to think about is if you've been born about 50 to 80 years, you've seen that dollar drop its value by multiple times. Do you remember when gas was only a few cents and now it's $3, $4, $5? This is what it's all about, all right? How much you can buy with $1 is decreasing because the amount of debt, all right? And the reasoning behind all of this is that we don't have a stable world reserve asset. All right, if there was a stable world reserve asset, then we would all be able to agree on what is the world currency. But because every country has its own currency, fiat, every country has its own fiat, what we have to come up with is a bridge currency. A bridge currency. We have all these different places. We want them all to come together and agree on something where all the assets that each country creates, whether it's beans, rice, meat, flour, it doesn't matter. All of the assets can be determined by a certain value of a currency. And then we could exchange that currency faster, more securely, easier, and more than anything, with more proof and security of where it's going, how it got there, and ideally, the speed of transaction is the key. All right, because right now, due to the Swift payment network, it takes about 3 to 5 days for a payment to clear because of all of this, and then because it has to get all the different codes, which I don't want to get into today, that have to go from the back end of the central banks to the Federal Reserve to the back end operations of legal local banks to then the access codes on your screen to then be able to give you a display on your personal screen. I know that it says maybe $100, $200, but at the end of the day, whatever it says in that account, it's not really yours. It's the bank's. They're just showing you what's in your account through the bank. You don't really have direct and only access to that account. You actually have to be given permission to that account. And that's what I want to talk about. You see, America has been running on this old idea that we are free. But they never really did the research to understand where monetary policy began and how it's evolved so that it's actually enslaving us. And by us having children being born in America before this time, our children would be enslaved to a lifetime of financial stress or enslavement. And I'll continue on with this because there is so much information that I want to share with you. I'll be doing my best to be able to put in slides as well as information that should be able to educate you on what is actually going on at a deeper level. But for right now, I just want to get this story across because if you can understand that in the past, trade and tribes were the only thing. But then, between trades and tribe came colonialism. And this is where religion began. Right? Each tribe in the past had its own way of perceiving the world. Whether it was one God, two gods, a story, whether they believed in animals or whether they believed in the stars. It didn't matter, but each tribe had its own culture. Now, as Americans, we benefit of what the British have done. But let's look back on what the British did, right? Because Britain, Portugal, all these European countries, they are, as far as we know, the first to really sail the seas. But let's be honest, Morocco, a lot of those African countries, they were already sailing the seas before us. All right, so just think about it. The difference is blacks did not approach this game about conquering. It was more about connecting. Whites in Europe wanted to impose their will and therefore impose religion as a form of control. Now, what is religion? All right, it is imposing a belief for success. Now, this imposed belief for success is also a blueprint for civilization to become more civilized. All right, this means individuals can go from just being out in the dirt and moving into homes. I don't know what to tell you. I think we already had homes in tribes. They were just different types. Obviously, the ability to create what is called temples, right? Religion leads to temples. And these temples require offerings in order for a good day. And so the reason I have a hard time accepting religion is because while these temples were being created and people were being offered, a lot of misleading concepts were introduced. Number one, sacrifice, right? We've seen it in movies like Apocalypto, where the individual lays on top of this lingam and gets sliced open, they rip out his heart. These temples were meant for regular people to do offerings to the gods. All right, now somehow an individual was able to put themselves on top of the rest and say that our bloodline was destined, right? And a lot of these bloodlines come from, the Middle East. And so that's why when we think about all of these things, we got to think, okay, well, where did life originate? Life originated in the Middle East. And how they dispersed themselves out of that is a whole different story. But the idea of being able to control people's thoughts, opinions, and actions really comes back to the idea of there being a temple where somebody could offer, whether it's their wealth, their health, or their physical body, to be able to give themselves up for a bigger reason, right? Give themselves for wealth or success or health. And so a lot of people here offering would give up their daily hours or income, right? So if 24 hours equals money you can make or food you could grow, you know that there are people in the world that are not trying to do the work. You know there's people in the world always looking for a way out. And so if I need to grow food, why don't I just find somebody else that'll do it for me for less, right? If I require 3 bowls of food to be able to finish today's job, I'm gonna go look for somebody that only needs 1, and I'm gonna eat 2, give them 1, and have them do the work for me. Makes sense? And so this is how it all happened. And the fact is that as more money kept giving up their wealth, the people at the temples became richer, which then were able to go ahead and impose their beliefs, but through colonialism, they were able to invest more. Invest, profit, and then this is where we start creating corporations, because corporations are ways for us to keep that money that we've invested or profited from without being touched by anybody. Because a corporation, based upon the fact that it can have its own identity and it can have its own fictional actions, you can think of it, this entity, an LLC, a C Corp, or an S Corp, as another you that cannot be touched legally. And that's important, all right, because it separates you from that entity. And this is why the East Dutch Trading Company was fantastic. I mean, they made trillions of dollars, selling spices and all these different things from Africa to Europe and all these different routes that they came up with. And so when we look at everything that is going on, the technology of the past was writing down on what is called a ledger to keep an account book, right? So in this ledger, the persons that were in the docks or doing the trade, the individuals who were conducting the trade would write down everything that was going on, and then they would return back home, and then they would do finances back home. And I mean, the game was based on those who had the ability to write and count. But if you did not have the literacy to write or count, you couldn't be in one of these positions of power. And power meant the ability to trade, to have influence, to be able to have authority over others. And so writing and counting was such an important skill back in the day, because you see, in order to go ahead and make money in the market, you had to have these abilities, or you had to have some kind of agricultural product that you could trade in the market. And once you can see how the market was only created out of a need to trade goods grown through the agricultural process, but was limited because of the fact of different tribal commerce rules. Because each tribe had a different structure of commerce, we all had to come together under something. In this case, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Dutch, and then it became the British, and then all of a sudden we have this new corporation, because the British made so much profit that they created a brand new corporation called the United States. And well, this is kind of what we started exploring the new world, right? We started having so much money that we started exploring the new world. And this is why we have the idea of ships coming over from Europe and then discovering America, right? They didn't discover it. People were already there. They just did trade or commerce in a different way. So what we had to do is we had to impose our personal trading methodology onto them. And if they didn't want to take it, we were going to force them. So what did we do? We shot them. We killed them. We raped them. And that's basically what happened. All right? Because all the people from Europe wanted to impose their new strategies of commerce onto the new world, which is America. So this is when we became 13 colonies. These 13 colonies obviously wanted to break away from taxation, because if they made any profit, tax, it means that they had to do it and give it back to the queen. And that's not right. That's not right. That was the whole reason how all of this began. This is why it's all bad, because they were taxing. We call this an offering, but it's really a tax to live, right? Because if there was no rulers, you would be your own ruler. And if there was nobody to tell you what to do or how to live, you wouldn't have to give anybody anything. You would just have to earn everything. So this means that because you're not given anything, you have to earn everything. You get to keep everything. So these 13 colonies were not happy about this. This is why we had the Boston Tea Party. It's a small way of saying, look, we said we don't want the tax. We want to break away from the queen. We want to become our own place. And so they ran away from it. They did not want to be a corporation anymore. So the U.S. created their own constitution. Now, in this constitution, it was stated that, we were getting free for the people, we were going to have rights and all these different things. But we've seen that deteriorate since the 1700s. And that's the whole point here of America. That things can change when people don't understand the foundation of these things. And when people don't speak up, we lose our ability to keep control of our own gains. And so the SWIFT payment method really came to be as the Federal Reserve was created. All right, the Federal Reserve, which if I'm not mistaken, was on 12/23/1913. I believe that's the day that it was created, 1913. So I want you to realize that the Fed was created here. The Fed was created there. The Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve was created by some of the wealthiest individuals at the time. All right, individuals like Carnegie, like Vanderbilt, like J.P. Morgan, all these different individuals who were able to have substantial amount of wealth to be able to privately fund this country. It's a private fund. These are banks. All right. Now, private wealth created, once again, their own banks, but because these private individuals had their own agenda to just keep making more money, more money, more money, more money. Doesn't matter what we do with the money. It's just they want to make more money. So they started this new idea of, if they print out a bill, we will be charged interest on that bill. So now, every time we print out $1, we have to pay $1.10, $1.15, $1.20. The point is not only a one-to-one anymore. So if we earned one, we could pay it back. No, you got to pay back a little bit more than one. Long story short, this is how our world has gotten into major trillions of dollar debt. Now, if we were to say somebody could save us, who could save us? Right? There's trillions of dollars in debt. There's so many countries that don't operate on a stable currency. And so because of that, we have to think of America as being the only place that took a chance at finding its way out of taxation. Didn't succeed. Truly didn't succeed. But we can see how we went from being tribes and started adopting religion in order to have more ease of access. This could mean to roads, water, electricity, food, it doesn't matter. Protection was one of the main things too, right? Like you would give up some of your personal rights or personal wealth, in order for somebody to always be around and protect you, right? It's that simple. You don't want to create a lot of produce or agricultural value, but they're not having being protected. And so as we keep moving through everything that is going on in the world, whether it's the gold standard, the petrodollar standard, or the credit standard, we're going to remove that. We're going to go into the digital yuan now. And as we transition into the digital yuan, just like China is doing, not only will we be able to get rid of what is called the relationship of the central banks to the bank, to the people, the central bank will only be able to go directly to the people now. And that's what we want to do. We want to get rid of the banks. We need a monetary policy that gets rid of banks, because these are people that don't need to control our own money. However, because now all the central banks, the people with the money, they've created a new world reserve asset. Now they're going to be able to give it directly to the people based upon an app. Right? We know this. We know that the technology has been increasing so rapidly that a central bank's decision to go around us to get to the banks first is not needed anymore. So what they're going to do is they're going to be able to directly send money to us. This is why in the US, all these different type of legalities and legislations are being passed currently, because we are transitioning out of the SWIFT payment method into a brand new transitional payment method. And it may seem crazy to think that all of this could happen right before our eyes, but it is. A lot of you guys use PayPal. A lot of you guys use Venmo or Zelle. These are basically the same things that we were talking about, except these apps or applications are being created by either companies or banks. These are not being created by the privately owned central banks. And so you got to remember that the Federal Reserve is not part of the United States. It is a private entity. It's a private institution. So central banks from all over the world, whether it's Saudi Arabia, China, the US, they're all trying to get on an agreement of how to create a brand new world reserve asset. And I keep talking about this because this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened in my lifetime. Yes, I understand 9/11 was major, but this is bigger than 9/11. It was called 2020. And the people that could really see the truth saw the truth. Those that couldn't, haven't. And if you're listening, I hope you're able to keep up with everything that's going on, because I am going to erase this, and we're going to be going to second part of this video where I'll be able to explain to you what this is all about. All right, because all of this was the past. It's gone. It's all about this now. So stay with me, because here we go.